Hello, everybody. This is Rob Fredette with the podcast HODGEPOD, and I have another guest on my podcast. This is episode 97. Brian Brady joins me. He's been gracious enough to join me, and he also has a book out called Hiding in Plain Sight. Brian, welcome to my podcast. I'm looking forward to talking to you today. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thanks for having me on.
All right. So please introduce yourself. You had a 40-year career in law enforcement. So talk about that, and then we'll talk about your book and your career as well. So again, welcome.
Okay. I was born and raised in San Francisco. That's home. I started my career in Berkeley, spent the 9 years there, then East LA for a couple of years, and then New Mexico for about 4 years, then back to the Bay Area, and worked in the city of Novato, about 30 miles north of San Francisco, and retired there as the police chief. Then went to work as the vice president and deputy chief security officer for NBCUniversal down in Los Angeles. About 10 years with them, and then back to the Bay Area as the head of security for the San Francisco Museum of Modern Art. And then I'm just doing a little consulting work now and writing a book.
That's great. That's great. Well, thank you very much for your service in law enforcement. And do you remember your first call you got when your first day on the job? Do you remember? Because I've asked law enforcement people, and they remember their first call. Do you remember your first call?
Vividly. I was 21 and just out of the academy. And the first call was a domestic dispute. Two people who had been married longer than I was alive. And I was supposed to show up at the house and offer them sage advice on how to save their marriage. He's talking about a fish out of water.
Wow, that's amazing. Everybody remembers their first call, their first hit, or in sports or anything like that. So I always like to ask that question. Talk about your book, Hiding in Plain Sight. And now this is a thriller book. So is it based on true events?
Yes, it is. I mean, the actual story is changed, but it is based on a kidnap and murder of a 13-year-old that I actually worked on. And the book it's the second, actually. The first book was called Oh, What a Tangled Web. It's the same characters, and there's a third one coming with the same group. But Hiding in Plain Sight is based on loosely this kidnapping and homicide of a 13-year-old. The book takes place in San Francisco, and it deals with the San Francisco homicide inspectors, same as the other books. And it's a North Beach homicide. And North Beach is a very famous Italian community in San Francisco, very close-knit. And the victim's father's a firefighter. So you have the interaction between the police and the fire department. And of course, she's a parochial school girl. So you have the archdiocese involved and the pressure being put on the inspectors to solve the case. So it adds all the elements you can have in a homicide case.
San Francisco is a great city. My wife and I went there for vacation. We did Alcatraz. We went to the Giants game. Talk about San Francisco. It is an amazing city. It's the Golden Gate Bridge, another one. I walked on the Golden Gate Bridge and it was vibrating. I got very nervous when I was walking it.
It does that, but actually it's supposed to. But then the big excitement, I mean, several years ago, they took the whole road base off the Golden Gate Bridge because when it was first built, there weren't that many cars. So it was a pretty heavy road base. So with technology, they were able to rip the road base out and put a much lighter, more durable road base in, which then it allowed for the additional cars. But the city is, for writing a book, it's a great place because when you mention places, just like you did about Alcatraz or the bridge or the ballpark or the museum, even if people haven't been to San Francisco, they've seen it in a movie. They've seen it on television. They've seen it somewhere. So folks will recognize the landmarks. And I think that helps in a book. It allows people to feel connected.
I remember the Dirty Harry movies with Clint Eastwood. I also remember the streets of San Francisco with a young Michael Douglas and Carl Malden. So it's always seeing those landmarks, the Transamerica Building, the Golden Gate Bridge. It's just a great city. So I just had to get that in there. I love San Francisco. So how did you comprise of the book? I know if I talk to authors, there's a discipline when you have to write a book because you have to really stay on message and stay on task to complete the book. Is that right?
Yes. And that's probably one of the hardest things when you first start putting it together, and it's a bit of a hobby and you're not as disciplined as you need to be. And I had good fortune, an author who penned a lot of books, fellow by the name of Sheldon Siegel. And he's here in the Bay Area, and he writes about attorney to public defenders and defense attorneys in San Francisco. And he talked about writing every day. And his advice was you get up and you write something, whether it's, if you have nothing to say, write about what you saw outside your window, write about what happened yesterday, right? But just get in the habit of writing and be disciplined and make it part of your routine. You have to, and he's right. And once you start doing that, it comes a little easier, and then you keep notes and then you work off your notes. But you do sit down at the computer and write, and you got to set aside time to do it.
And your experiences working in law enforcement, probably things come up that you remember. You probably have notes as well, probably from your career. So does that help as well when you're writing the book?
Huge. And I, because of working in 4 different departments and working for the studio and the museum, I've got friends and connections from those places, and each of them have a story or 2 or 3. And so the characters in the book, the homicide inspectors, are really composites of people I've worked with and been associated with over the years. And the stories they're fiction, but they're loosely based on fact. It's not historical fiction. It's not like Herman Wouk writing Winds of War. It's sitting down and writing something that you take a series of facts and you can embellish them or diminish them, but make them flow. So hopefully your reader connects with the characters and connects with what the characters are doing. And I think for me, that's the most important thing, is they like the character and they can connect with it.
While we're talking about your books, where can you get your books? That way, if somebody's interested, where can you get your books? And if you could, please.
Sure. At Amazon, Kindle, Barnes & Noble, and I think they're at Target now. But most of it's online.
Okay, great. Yeah, online definitely helps. Back years ago, there wasn't online. Everything was being mailed, but you can just get it on your phone and be taken care of. So in your career, have you worked on some famous cases or been involved in some famous cases that people might recognize?
Well, I know that one of the people we're interested in we talked earlier about the Zebra case and the Zodiac and the Night Stalker, some of these huge cases of great notoriety. While I was peripherally involved in the Zebra case because one of the cases ended up over in Berkeley, but the others, I was so fortunate in my career that I have friends who were homicide inspectors in San Francisco. And when I first went to work homicide, we didn't handle the numbers of homicides they did. So I basically imposed on them to be a fly on the wall on my days off and go over and spend my time with them. And they were gracious enough to take me on calls with them, let me sit in on interviews with them, let me read case files, let me just basically be present. So I got to be around them when they worked those major cases. So while I wasn't working them personally, I got to watch the cases evolve with these incredibly talented investigators.
And these were considered serial killings. Were they not serial killer cases? Were they not?
Zodiac and Night Stalker. And then, I guess zebra killings, zebra killings were more racially motivated, but definitely the Zodiac and the Night Stalker were serial.
So what was it like? You said you had the experience of having the fortunate experience of being around law enforcement to grasp and be in the situation. So what did you learn from that? Because I'd be like a fly on the wall. It must have been fascinating in one respect, but also educational for experience-wise for your job.
I think probably the takeaway was how much these people cared about what they were doing, how much they cared about the victims, how dedicated they were, how personal it was for them to catch the bad guy, how hours didn't matter, days of the week didn't matter. They were willing to put in whatever it took to get the case resolved. And the level of caring, and that was, I guess that really jumped out at me, the level of caring they had for the victims' families. And they were truly involved. I mean, and not just in the sense that they were working the case, but they became a thread with the family and the entire series of events. So I think that was the first thing. And then the second was what talented interviewers they were. And that's something that doesn't come easy, to sit down and talk to a suspect. And they use terms like interview, interrogation, et cetera. And on TV, you hear they're going to sweat the person. They're going to take them to the interrogation. So with these inspectors were so talented. One in particular, a fellow named Jack Cleary, who was kind of a mentor for me. Jack's interviews were conversations.
Mm.
They were personal. He wasn't trying to, or didn't certainly didn't appear to be trying to extract information. He got the information. He got the information because he had this conversation and people were comfortable talking to him. And with that comfort level came dialogue. With dialogue came information, and people shared things, and it was incredible to watch.
One of my first episodes I ever did on my podcast was with a former retired FBI special agent. Back in the 90s, there was the I-95 serial killer, and he was in the interrogation room with him, and there were 6 murders, if I'm not mistaken. And just when I was talking to him, like you said, it was a conversation. He wanted to earn the respect of the person he was interviewing. He didn't go in there like you see in the TV shows, tell me now, but he was able to get in a conversation with Gary Ray Bowles, if I remember correctly, was his name. And just the fact that he could converse with him, and the actual had a respect for him as well. The serial killer had a respect for the FBI special agent.
I think that's paramount to being successful as an interviewer. It is that comfort level where a person feels they can talk to you, and you're still doing your job. You're trying to elicit information to work the case, but it doesn't have to be necessarily adversarial. And I think that's one of the first things you want to break, is it's not an adversarial relationship. You're in there to get information to resolve the case. And a conversation gets you a whole lot further than an interrogation.
What's it like? Did you get any sense from the interrogations, maybe talking to those people investigating those crimes? What's it like for them? I don't know if I would be able to sit in front of a serial killer like that, but you have to have a certain demeanor to do that.
You do. And it's difficult because sometimes what the perpetrator has done is pretty heinous. I mean, there's some pretty gruesome homicides and some pretty horrible things that people are capable of. And sometimes you have to go take a break and walk away from it and go out, step outside the box and collect yourself. And that's why these teams of investigators, I think, are so effective, because they feed off one another and they know their partner and when the interview is going on, and they pretty much know when it's time to take a break and regroup. And they'd step outside the room, and 3 or 4 of them would sit down together, and they were all listening and watching, and they'd offer suggestions. And so you weren't on your own. It wasn't like you were in this situation by yourself. You had a lot of backup and a lot of good information coming from the people you work with. So when you would take your break and go back in, you were kind of refreshed, and you had a plan as to how to go forward. And you've been given a lot of good information by people who were giving you constructive criticism on what you were doing.
Interesting. So talk about the Zodiac killer. I tried to do some research on that. That was a complex case, was it not? I was trying to figure it out. There were some murders, but what was that case like, if you could expand on that?
A bit. The case, it's complicated because the homicides took place in different jurisdictions. And one of the problems with law enforcement going back in the past is that there wasn't a great sharing of information. People tended to operate in a kind of a silo, and you did your side of the street, and somebody did their side of the street. And oftentimes information didn't go back and forth. So you had, I think one of the homicides was in Solano County, one was in Napa County, and then one in San Francisco. So you had 3 different sets of investigators working, not at odds with one another, but not necessarily in lockstep with one another. And where today, it's much more efficient. And part of it's computers, part of it's systems that law enforcement has right now where they share information. And you mentioned the FBI, they're one of the premier as far as serial killers. They probably have the greatest database and profiles on serial killers in the world. And part of that is because they collect that information daily and put it into a computer. And so if you have a serial killer and your victim is female and she is of this race, approximate age, and the method of the homicide is such and such, they plug that in the computer and they can come up with 2 or 3 names of people who have killed that way that might still be on the street or out or whatever. So that's I say relatively new. I mean, not yesterday, but in the last 20, 30 years. And then DNA. DNA has been incredible. It's just the amount of information you can extract from a hair follicle is just, I mean, I don't understand the science part of it. It's magic. It really is. You send a hair follicle to the lab and they come back with the name of the bad guy. That just blows me away. That's just incredible.
It's amazing because back probably 50 years ago, there were no security cameras. You can't go anywhere without seeing a security camera. You mentioned DNA and then also technology with the computer sharing and databases. So it looks like crimes can be solved in a much more efficient manner and quickly with all these forces and all these agencies working together.
Sure. If you watch a TV show, they can do it. They can solve 6 homicides in 45 minutes with 3 commercial breaks.
That's that's wild. Yeah. Talk about, if you would, I've had some, guests on about serial killers and people who are serial killers. They don't have any filter at all, whether what's right or wrong. I still can't believe that they just have no remorse and they have this thing in their mind where they just don't care. Can you talk about that? Because I just find that hard to believe.
Well, it makes 2 of us. It defies how you were brought up. It defies what logic for most of us that someone could so cavalierly take someone's life and then go do it again and again. And basically it will continue until they're caught. There has to be some major event. And usually 1 or 2 things happens. They either get caught for something else and go to jail, and that breaks the cycle. And then you'll have a serial killer where you might have 3 or 4 homicides, and then all of a sudden it will stop for 5 years. And it turns out that person got arrested for something and was in jail for those 5 years, and they'll come out and pick up again. So usually they either die, spend some time in jail with breaking the cycle, or we catch them, but they don't stop.
You mentioned earlier about DNA. There was the case, I think it was late last year, the Gilgo Beach murders, the serial killer. The New York City and the New York police were tailing this gentleman, and he ended up throwing a pizza box in the trash outside his office, and they waited for him to do that. And when they arrested him, he was in shock. But again, that's unbelievable. You talked about DNA. I mean, that's public property after he throws it in the trash.
Discard DNA is what it's called. And it's solved a lot of cases. You get a suspect and they do just what New York did in that case, and that just follow until somebody discards something that has saliva or some bodily fluid that they can pick up. And like you said, once it's tossed in the garbage, there's no privacy right to it.
And it's amazing that they were probably surveilling him for a while. And sometimes people don't know they're being surveilled if they're on to, finding a killer or killers. They're able to follow them. And then at the right time, unexpectedly, you just see there's a shock that they got caught.
And you mentioned New York. New York is, a great department they do have one thing over most departments, and that's manpower. That's a big police department, about 38,000 police officers. So they have the ability on their surveillance units. They have multiple units, multiple people. And if you're going to follow somebody, that's what you have to do. You can't follow somebody with one person. It's too obvious, et cetera. So they'll put a 5-6 person team on that. So the person who's being surveilled doesn't see the same person every day, doesn't see the same person twice. So yeah, they're very good. They do a good job.
So talk about your work as a police chief. Where were you a police chief at again?
Novato, which is about 30 miles, a city of about 60,000, about 30 miles north of San Francisco.
That must have been rewarding as well, being police chief, having a police force below you. So talk about that, if you would.
It is. It's, as you come up through the ranks, you always say when you're first a police officer, you say, well, if I was a sergeant, I wouldn't do it that way. I'd do it differently. And then when you make lieutenant, you say, well, I would never do it that way. So finally, when you get to the chief, the buck stops there. You don't have anyone to blame. So you got to have to make the decisions. And I think what's critical, and I think probably most important, make some collective decisions. Don't be arbitrary. I had a really great staff around me. I had really good people. And our staff meetings were pretty democratic. There was no rank at the meeting. People were free to speak, and everybody's opinion was valued. I even had a place at the table for the president of the police union that they had a seat at the table. But I looked at it from the standpoint that they represent the rank and file of the organization. And it was twofold. One, it gave me as the police chief input on to things that were of import to the officers. And conversely, when we made a decision at the table that they were part of, if a group of rank and file people didn't like the decision, I had the handoff. Say, well, your association voted it in. Don't blame me. So, but I think we made some good collective decisions that way.
And when you and after that, you went to after your police chief days. Where did you go after that? You went into the private sector.
NBCUniversal in Los Angeles.
Wow.
And I spent 10 years with them. Great job. Great place to work. We had the CEO of the company is a gentleman named Ron Meyer. Great human being. One of those rare people. He started in the mailroom at a talent agency when he was 21 and ultimately ended up being the studio chief. Just a great guy. And he never forgot where he started. He always treated people well. And he picked really fine people to run the organization. A fellow named Jim Waters was the president of studio operations, who I worked for, and absolutely great boss that treated everybody well. And so my responsibility was the studio, which is about 400 and something acres in Los Angeles,
wow.
40 sound stages, a back lot, and the theme park, the Universal Studios, and the City Walk, which is all the retail stores, 81 retail stores around the park. And then we also had the responsibility for all of our owned TV stations west of the Mississippi. And then I had all worldwide movie production. So I was responsible for our movie crews that were shooting movies around the world. So it was a great job. It was 24/7, but it was a great job.
24/7. So you must have saw a lot of actors and actresses around, didn't you?
We did. And because of our sound stages that are rented out, we would have shows that would have shoot on our sound stages that weren't Universal productions or even NBC productions. But that's pretty typical in Los Angeles. When you have the bigger studios, Universal, Warner, Sony, you will sometimes run out of space for your own people. So they'll end up shooting an episode or something over on somebody else's lot. So we had shows, CSI Vegas, the original CSI, that shot on our lot, and that was a CBS show. So
really,
that's kind of yeah.
Wow, that must have been awesome. So you must have, you probably got some great memories from working there. That's pretty cool. My wife and I, we hit that as well when we went to Los Angeles and at Universal Studios. That was pretty awesome. It was amazing.
It's a great place, and the tour is great. I think people really enjoy that.
They had, I can't remember. It was from a movie. They had like the set from the movie. I can't remember what it was. I wish it was. They had
probably Backdraft.
Which one?
Backdraft with the fire movie, Backdraft, Ron Howard movie.
There was something with fire and a plane too, if I remember. There was a plane one.
Oh, that's the War of the World.
That's it. Yes, that was it.
Yeah.
Oh man, that was like, it's amazing to see how like those movies were actually shot there, right?
Yes, and that particular set, we under Mr. Meyer, we were very involved in the community with public safety, police, fire. And I can't tell you how many times that set was used for training for FAA, police, et cetera, to be able to deal with a plane crash without actually having a plane crash. But we had a plane crash on the lot as part of that set and part of that tour. So they would close the set for that day for the tour, and they'd let people like the FAA or NTSB come in and do their training for their new agents on a real live down plane.
Wow. You know what's amazing too? Like when you watch a football game or a basketball game and you see tens of thousands, full stadiums of 180,000, there's a lot of work that goes into the event for people, security, all the people behind the scenes. And I'm sure it's like that at the studio too. You have to make sure everything is safe and running smoothly when your capacity.
You do. And then when you're part of a major network like NBC has the Olympics. So we had the Olympics were run out of our New York office, but we had people from our office assigned to that team that was in London or Tokyo or wherever the Olympic game is being held. And then I don't know what the rotation is now on Super Bowl, and that you're going to get that every 4 years. Like Fox will get it, ABC, CBS, and then NBC. So whoever bids and gets the Super Bowl, that's kind of a nightmare too.
Yeah, it is. Anything you work I've worked World Series and Orange Bowls and Sugar Bowls, and it's amazing just the process of people getting ready for the event. I mean, you watch the game on TV, but there's thousands of people working behind the scenes that you don't even see. You just see the game. I find that to be incredible. So.
Yeah. And the Olympics are everything you just talked about, only for 19 days.
Yeah.
Just one event, one venue, multiple venues, multiple days, and the putting everything together for that planning for us at NBC, that would start literally when they extinguished the torch. We were planning for the next one.
And LA's getting the Olympics in 28. So I'm sure they're already planning for that as well. So are you going to be involved with that, you think?
I don't think so. I think they're pretty well set. They're very fortunate that they just got a new police chief in LA, Jim McDonnell, great guy. And he'll do a wonderful job for them. He's former LA assistant chief. And Jim was there for the 84 Olympics in LA. So LA, the good news is LA's done it before.
Yeah.
And so that does help. And they have a really good system set up between the LA police and the LA sheriffs and the agencies that surround, because everything's not going to be at the Coliseum. As you know, for 84, for instance, the water polo was at Pepperdine, and some of the equestrian was Orange County, and the volleyball was in Long Beach. And so you were shuffling people and agencies all the time. And that right now, again, we talked about the computers and the connectivity. That makes a huge difference because you have all these multiple agencies involved, and now they can all talk to each other.
So talk about your police career as well, and anything that stands out, anything that stands out story-wise that you could elaborate on your career? Because I know you talked about the serial killer cases that you were able to be in the room with. What about some finer points of your career that you could let my audience know about?
A couple of things come to mind. One, as far as famous, I was in Berkeley and we worked when Patty Hearst was kidnapped. And that turned into quite a nightmare for some period of time. And then as a police officer, Berkeley was unique in that, without belaboring it, we were what they call generalist officers. And that meant that you were literally responsible for whatever happened on your beat, from a homicide to a traffic accident. And you had to do the follow-up investigation. Detectives didn't do the follow-ups. You did it. So you learned to be a good investigator. You learned to manage your time. And just one case came to mind where a young woman had been kidnapped and sexually assaulted. And I got the case, and it happened in my area. And she was an incredible witness. She was great description. Anyway, long story short, we end up based on her information, we find the car 2 nights later, and we sit on the car, stake it out, and 2 of the 4 guys come back. We grab them, tow the car. So I'm responsible for collecting the evidence in the car, vacuuming, getting hairs, fibers, etc. on the car. And we have those 2 in a lineup. She picks them, no problem. They give up the other 2, get warrants. And we ultimately arrested everybody, and they all ended up going to prison. But it was a complicated case. And when you're a fairly young officer and you're responsible for all that, you're very cognizant of that this young woman, she went through hell, and it's all on your shoulders to right this wrong and somehow give some closure for her and to take these people off the street so they don't do it again. And in that case, we were successful. And so felt pretty good when that was done, that we had actually, the good guys won.
So you talked about this case here. You just mentioned about that woman. It's pretty much, was it on your mind when you got off shift about something that happened that you had to try to find? Was it on your mind till you got back to the next day? How did you cope with that?
That particular case was definitely to the point where I actually was on vacation, was supposed to be on vacation when the trial was called. So I canceled my vacation, and so I could testify and do that part of the case. It was that important that one did resonate with me for some time, probably because it was brutal and it was 4 people beating up on one, the bully thing. And she was such a nice person and, such a great witness. And, she'd been through hell, but she was incredibly resilient and just a really, really nice, wonderful woman, and did a great job.
So talk about, I remember that Patty Hearst situation. It was in the early 70s. I remember seeing some videos of them in the bank with her in the bank. That was kind of strange, wasn't it?
That was, that was after. That was at the Hibernia Bank in San Francisco. And she and the crew were robbing the bank. Now, her version was that they gave her an unloaded gun and told her she had to participate so they would get her on camera, because obviously they knew banks had cameras. And so that was, she said she was a participant, but not a willing participant. So yeah, and it was, there are people who think she was victimized. There are people who think she went along with the thing. The jury's out, but she's married, has children. She's a pillar of the community. So, I mean, who knows what the actual, and no one will know.
Wow. That's just unbelievable. Yeah. One thing I've, when you watch television as well, you see shows like The First 48 and you see the way how they go about solving a case and getting the facts. Do you ever watch any of those shows on TV, or do you stay away from those?
No, I'll watch. And see, sometimes, they're not exaggerating. In a homicide, getting resolution early is important. And part of it is because the longer things drag on, if there's evidence to be collected, you're going to have to get it immediately. You want to talk to witnesses immediately because people's memory fades. There is a sense of immediacy to get things rolling as fast as you can. Plus, there's always the issue if the suspect obviously is assuming you're going to figure out who it is, they're going to take off. So you'd like to be able to get resolution early on. So yeah, I think that's, and a lot of the shows on TV, they're real. They're talking about what actually happened. And there's a little magnification, glorification, sometimes the way it's handled. But all in all, I think that they do a good job, and they're telling you exactly what they did and how they resolved the case. So it's accurate.
Mm-hmm. I love watching the show, The First 48, that the way they go about it and how they solve cases. And there's some cases they don't solve, and at the very end, they talk to the victims, and it gives you like an insight onto what happens. It's really a good show. I don't even know if it's on anymore, but I remember watching it years ago. That's one of the shows I did watch. And one thing about law enforcement is they're always there to help. Talk about that, if you would. About 4 or 5 months ago, I was helping out somebody I knew on the side of the road. He had a flat tire, and cars were speeding by, and police officer pulled up behind us, ran the blue lights, and then he let us go over to the other side safely. So that's one thing. They're here to help. Law enforcement is here to help us.
Yeah, I agree. And there's and that's why 99.9% of people who go into police and fire work, ambulance, paramedics, they want to help people. I mean, they truly do. That's your overall goal. And I think for some of us in law enforcement, for me, I know there's always that issue of the bully. And I've always felt better, or that I accomplished something, when you could turn the tables on someone who had been a bully and make an arrest and take them out of their position of power over people that they were using. I thought that was one good thing we could do. But people do go into the business for the right reasons. And there are that, and unfortunately, they make the headlines, the ones that should not be in the business. And we do a pretty good job of weeding them out. But given there's, almost 700,000 police officers in the United States, there's going to be a few that get through.
And you've written a couple of books here. And is there any stories over the years that were like something funny happened, you can look back and say that something funny that turned out to be not a big deal, and you drove away? But was there anything that had a light moment?
The start of the story is not, but we had a situation where we had an individual who had broken into a couple of houses and committed sexual assaults in the middle of the night, that sort of thing. And we were working with extra people out. We were trying to catch this guy. And I was working up in a north end town, and I heard this woman scream, and you try and pinpoint because in the middle of the night, it's really hard. But there was a second scream, so we were able to narrow it down. Mm-hmm. So we climbed over a back fence into a yard, and there's a set of French doors in the backyard, and one of the panes next to the knob is broken out. There's glass on the ground. The door's ajar. So we get, back up. We seal off the house. We go inside. We tiptoe through, and you can hear a commotion up on the second floor. This woman is screaming or moaning, and we run up the stairs. We kick the bedroom door in, and it's a woman and her husband who were both intoxicated. They would come home, couldn't find their house key, and broke the glass to get in the patio door. And I'm sure that was a memorable evening for them.
Oh my gosh, that's awesome! That's awesome. So you guys must have been laughing the whole night after that, right? You must have I can't believe this just happened.
Yeah, that was one that resonated for a while.
Man, oh man, I bet you they were shocked.
That's probably putting it mildly.
So talk about also homicide detectives. Were you ever involved in being a homicide detective?
Yes.
What was that like? That's amazing. I know we talked a little bit about it earlier, but talk about that, because again, you have to have a certain, I guess, demeanor about that, but talk about that, because that's like you were a homicide detective. It's like me going to work. That's just amazing. Like that focus and that mindset.
I think part of it is you have to develop a certain detachment. And I think people see, you say detachment, and sometimes people think it's not caring. And that's not the case. You care, but your responsibility is to the victim. And there's the old homicide detectives used to say that they speak for the victim because the victim can't speak. So your job is to speak for that victim. And somehow the way you do that is by gathering the evidence, by being meticulous at that crime scene, because you only get one try to gather the evidence. Because once the body's removed and once the scene is released, so that detachment has to be, you kind of take a step back outside yourself and you start looking at the scene and the room and the evidence from that perspective. And yes, the victim is still there and you can't ignore that, nor would you ever want to, but you're looking for all the little things that are there, evidence that has to be secured, picked up, whatever has to be done, things you want to tell the CSI people that you want particularly them to look for. So then you end up changing gears from that to where you have to put a different hat on and go talk to the family. You have to make a death notification. You have to go tell somebody that their husband or wife or child isn't coming home. And that's horrible. I don't care how many years you do it. I don't care how many you make. They're all difficult. And people respond in all kinds of different ways. People go from complete destruction to others who just, it's such shock that they don't respond at all. And I can remember having to tell, I still remember, I can remember it vividly. Easter Sunday morning, I had to go tell a family, their son, who was like 26 or 7 years old, University of California graduate, a teacher down in Southern California, was coming home for Easter. Some drunk hit him on the road and killed him. And you had to go, the family was all gathered for Easter dinner, and you had to go knock at the front door and tell them that their son wasn't coming home. It just devastated that family. And so, yeah, those are really difficult, and it is personal. I mean, you really feel that. I mean, you shouldn't be in the business if you don't. So there's a detachment at the scene because you have to be to get done what needs to be done. And then you got to follow it up where you go through this very difficult portion with the victim's family. Then you change your gears one more time and you're back in the office gathering that evidence and piecing it together and trying to figure out who the suspect is.
So on a much lighter note, I mentioned the Dirty Harry movies. Do you have a favorite Dirty Harry movie? If you happen to watch them years ago, the Clint Eastwood movies?
Oh, the first one. I mean, the original Dirty Harry. It's fun to watch, and Clint Eastwood's great. He personifies the role, and they were all good. I mean, what is it in Hollywood? They all said that with a sequel, the best you ever can hope for on a sequel is someone will say it was as good as the original. It will never be better, and the chances are it'll be worse. So it's usually that first one that really sets the tone. And I think in Dirty Harry, that was it with him.
Yeah,
he did a good job.
I got Dirty Harry and Magnum Force on my digital library. I like Magnum Force because it was the 4 motorcycle cops, and David Soul and Robert Urich, I think, got their beginnings in acting and motion pictures back then. I'll never forget it. They pulled up the Clint Eastwood in the garage. You're either for us or against us. And he says, I think you misjudged me or something to that effect, and they took off. I thought that was a great scene. I thought they played that motorcycle vigilante group, but that was a really good Dirty Harry sequel.
The thing with that particular Magnum Force was that in San Francisco, to get to the motorcycle detail, you had to have about 15 years on the job. So in the movie, these guys are out of the academy, first assignment, that would never happen. And it's like in San Francisco, you see somebody on horseback on one of the mounted units in Golden Gate Park, and they're 25 years, never going to happen. Nobody gets that unit unless they've got 15 to 18 years on the job.
Man, that was great. He played those perfectly. That was awesome. But yeah. So talk about your books again, and where you can find them and all that good stuff.
Okay. Well, the Amazon and the Barnes & Noble, Kindle, Target. And if somebody's listening out there that has a hook with Netflix or HBO, I think the book would make a great series. But I think what I like about the books, and as you write them, you get to like your characters. It's kind of funny. You actually get caught up with it. But I try and make the books technically correct. So when people are reading it, the investigation goes in a logical step-by-step process. And I don't go from the scene to the conviction with no intervening steps. And I think sometimes that happens on television. And I realize they're working under a time constraint. But they get a piece of DNA evidence and they take it to the lab at 4:30 in the afternoon. And at 4:35, they have the results. It doesn't work that way. It takes sometimes weeks to get some DNA back, depending on what tests have to be run.
Mm-hmm.
So the CSI movies, in a way, have an expectation now. The public looks at that and expects results instantaneously, and it doesn't work quite that way. So I try to make the book accurate and it's technically correct, and the characters are likable. They're flawed. They have their issues, but not to the point that they're dysfunctional. Sometimes on TV, and I don't want to pick on BritBox, but BritBox, some of their characters, their leads are so flawed. They're alcoholics. They're covering drug addicts. I mean, my God, and that's not realistic, but it makes for good TV. But your character should have flaws like normal people have flaws, not debilitating flaws. So you try and make your characters likable, and you want someone to read and want to continue to read. I said once before to someone that a good book, Michael Connelly, I use him as an example frequently, the Harry Bosch. Mm-hmm. And I think Connelly does a great job with that. Bosch the character is great. You identify with him. If it hadn't been for the TV series, there'd be a couple 100,000 readers of Bosch that would have a couple 100,000 images of who Harry Bosch was and what they should look, exactly what he looked like, etc. And then once they did the TV series, Titus Welliver is Harry Bosch. That's it. But I think he's a likable character. And I think Connelly does a really good job with that. He makes him likable, and he's flawed. He has his problems. He has his issues, but he cares. And I think that's a great thing that Connelly puts forth in his book too. He shows that he does care. That's very important. So that I think that, and again, Connelly writes technically correct as well. He's very good he's technically right. He doesn't make too many mistakes.
So tell me about when your first book was printed and you got a box of your first book. What was that feeling like? I mean, that must have been awesome. It's
a little project, and you worked on it, and you develop a thick skin. And I say that it's kind of humorous in a way, because you write what you think is War and Peace. I mean, you've really done a great job. And you send off the first 25, 35, 50 pages to your editor, and they send you back 50 pages of corrections. I mean, there's red ink all over the place, and you're just crushed that how could somebody destroy this masterpiece that you just created? The good news is now with the editing, when it comes back to you, it's just in a column on the right-hand side, and it has a little arrow to where they want an insert or they want something different. So it's not quite so devastating as being in grammar school and having the good sister write all over your essay with red ink. But you have to learn that editor is there to help you, and they're gonna make your story better. And then fresh set of eyes seeing things. It's like when you're in college or high school when you're writing a term paper, you got to have somebody proof it, because when you finish it, it's a masterpiece. And
Yeah.
because you're so invested. And same thing with the book. You're invested in it, and the editors are removed. They're just looking at content flow. Does it work? And they make that happen. And so I think that's a big part of it. So the final product, yeah, you're proud of it, and it's out there, and somebody says, "You guys wrote a book." That's pretty cool. So then you want, like I said, then I want to be Michael Conley. I want to sell 500,000 copies and have my own TV show. But he's done a good job, and I've met him, and he's a really nice man and incredibly talented.
That's awesome. You mentioned characters on TV or television for characters in law enforcement or Florida. The one movie that just came to mind while you're talking about that was Lethal Weapon with Danny Glover and Mel Gibson. Mel Gibson. Yeah, that was a great movie, great dynamic in that movie. But I just thought about Mel Gibson and even Danny Glover. He was about ready to retire, and he had Riggs and Murtaugh together. I thought that was really cool. So,
and Danny Glover, the San Francisco guy.
That's right. Years ago, when I worked in Miami, I worked at Pro Player Stadium, and I remember the Marlins played the Giants in the divisional series. And I remember, if I'm not mistaken, Danny Glover was at that series there. I remember he had a Giants hat on. So, yeah, he is a big Giants fan, if I remember correctly.
He's from the city. Yeah, he's from the city, and I think he still lives there.
Really? Yeah, he's a great actor. And there's just something when they film movies in San Francisco or LA, it's got a different edge to it. It's got an aura about it. What do you think about that on the light side?
Oh, I do. I love the city. I mean, it's picturesque. If you're going to me, if you're going to shoot a movie and you could, well, I'm going to piss off the New Yorkers here, but San Francisco is my first choice. And another just incredibly picturesque Paris. If you were going to do something, obviously you're not going to have your San Francisco police guys. Although in the third book, with my heroes, Paris will get involved in the third book. But those are great cities. And New York's a great city. I'm being facetious. It's another great city to film. And it's got so many landmarks. People, even if they haven't been there, they feel like they have. And when they read that you're by the Empire State, oh yeah, I know what that is. Or, I'm down at the monument where the World Trade Center. Oh, okay, I know what that is. So I think that really helps when you have a city that's famous like that.
Yeah, I remember my wife and we went to New York City back in 2007, and they were still building the memorial there, and they were starting to build the World Trade Center. And there was about 4 or 5 police officers on the street there, and I had to take a picture with all of them. I got a great picture with some New York police officers. I thought that was neat. They were nice enough to do that. So I always think about that. Yeah, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Sometimes New Yorkers get a bad rap for people say they're rude or they're really not. It's just the pace is faster in New York. Things move. And but I've never not been treated well by New Yorkers. Even when you're lost or something and you ask somebody for directions, they'll stop and give you directions. Yeah. And there's people, they're nice people. They're just moving at a different pace.
It's a real fast pace, real fast. I mean, it is lightning speed compared to other places in the country. But I've been fortunate enough to have Brian Brady as a guest on my podcast. He's had a 40-year career in law enforcement. He's also an author of couple of books right now, but the latest one is Hiding in Plain Sight. And we have another one coming out too soon, right?
Yes. It's in final edit right now.
And I've been very, very honored that you came on my podcast, Brian. I hope you enjoyed it. And I really enjoyed you coming on. Thank you.
Well, thank you. I appreciate your time, and it was nice meeting you and being on the show.
Well, Brian, thank you very much. I really appreciate it. I hope you enjoyed it. I really enjoyed it. Thank you.
I'm glad. Yeah, it's fun. Because of the book, I've met some interesting people on some interviews, and I've had a really nice time doing that. And everybody's been very, very kind.
Every time I go, like last week, I live in Memphis, and I live in a little. It's Memphis, but I live in Bartlett, and anytime I see a police officer in Memphis or Bartlett, I always thank them for their service. They're so appreciative because police officers have a tough job, law enforcement, so they need to know that we care.
You got a good author that uses Memphis, and that's Don Grisham.
Yes, he does.
Yeah.
He does.
Yes, he does.
I think he lives in Oxford, if I'm not Oxford, Mississippi.
Yeah, he's a Mississippi guy. Yeah, but he definitely writes about the South. He definitely is another prolific good writer. And again, same thing. You write a good book. He did, the firm. It turns into a movie. I mean, it's a huge movie. And so he did a Time to Kill too, I believe.
He did Time to Kill,
Yes.
The Client as well. And then
Yeah.
The Firm obviously is a masterpiece. Memphis has a lot of landmarks here with that. So I guess when your third book comes out, maybe if you want to come back on, I'd like to have you back on again, maybe talk about that.
Absolutely. It should be out, hopefully. Like I said, the final, we're just putting the final touch. The editor's putting the final touch. I thought I had it all figured out, but that is an interesting experience. The first time you send pages out, and man, it comes back and you go, whoa, what did they do to my book? But I do appreciate your time, and I will definitely keep you posted when the third one's ready.
All right. Thank you again. I'm honored you came on. Thank you, Brian.
All right. Take care now. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.